The iPhone XR is dead. Well, more accurately, the iPhone XR has been officially discontinued and will no longer be sold brand new from Apple, though that doesn't have quite the same clickbait appeal to it. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and from 2018 to now, the iPhone XR lived a long, full life as the prominent budget choice in the iPhone lineup, selling well even 3 years later. So why did Apple discontinue it, and what does its future hold? To start this off, no, the iPhone XR isn't dead in the sense that the phone is obsolete or bad or even not great. At least in my opinion, the XR is still a fantastic device, having great specs with the A12 chipset just with that budget-oriented design and display. It runs iOS 15 like a champ, and you can expect a good few more years of full iOS updates without any hiccups. So if this is such a good phone, why would Apple even discontinue it? Well, let's back this train up a little bit closer to the beginning, late 2018, when the iPhone XR launched as the all-new budget iPhone compared to the flagship iPhone XS and XS Max. The XS would start at $999, whereas the XR started at $750, $250 less for a phone that really only suffered in the display department, with about the same specs and same camera, albeit minus the telephoto lens. But you could still take portrait mode photos, as for the first time Apple made it software only, making the XR an attractive option for nearly anyone looking to buy an iPhone. In hindsight, the XR in a lot of ways was actually the best option for Apple users in late 2018. The battery life especially was better than both the XS and XS Max, as Apple would improve that significantly the next year on the 11 Pro, but hadn't quite gotten around to it yet when it came to their OLED devices. The XS and XS Max were fine enough and likely would get you through the day, but they were hardly improved versus the 10, and I know personally when I was using my XS, the battery was always my biggest complaint. The XR, with its lower powered screen, didn't have this problem, and years onwards, as batteries would naturally degrade as the phone is being used, it's likely that the XR has aged better than most XS devices. The XR also had the benefit of being slightly bigger than the XS, at 6.1 inches as opposed to 5.8, smaller than the massive 6.5-inch XS Max, but it was still better battery-wise than that big phone. And that size of 6.1 inches ended up being what seems to be the perfect compromise between big and small. I remember my iPhone X and XS felt quite small to me, which led to me getting the 11 Pro Max, which felt a bit too big. But then in 2012, with the 12 Pro, Apple made the smaller option 6.1 inches, the same size diagonally as the XR had received 2 years prior. Even if the XR is a bit chunkier than, say, the iPhone 12 of the same screen size, there's no question that it's held up well in the design department, not feeling out of place in today's smartphone world. The iPhone XR was a bold move for Apple, albeit one they had tried about 5 years prior, with the iPhone 5C. Yep, the iPhone 5C was supposed to be the budget option to the premium iPhone 5S, made with cheaper materials and coming with a whole variety of fun new colors. The 5C was a cool phone, but one that was overpriced at only about $100 less than the 5S, and that 5S was significantly better in nearly every department, from the camera to the tech specs. The XR righted all these wrongs. The frame is aluminum instead of stainless steel, so it is lower quality, but it's still an absolutely premium feeling device with the glass back. It didn't do, say, plastic. And the specs are essentially equivalent to the XS, but yes, no OLED display, and the screen initially was hugely controversial, or at least it seemed that way, with many tech enthusiasts apparently outraged Apple would dare put out a sub 1080p resolution on a phone, especially for $750. A valid criticism mostly, but the bigger picture was lost on many of the critics. Yes, the XR does have a resolution of 828 by 1792, putting it at only slightly higher than 720p, but the pixel density is still 326 pixels per inch, which matched their typical Retina numbers. The same numbers they introduced in 2010 with the iPhone 4. That was another thing that detractors loved to tout, that the XR was the same quality as an 8-year-old phone. But this was deceptive, because while the iPhone 4 did have a pixel density of 326 pixels per inch, so did the iPhone 5, iPhone 6, iPhone 7, and iPhone 8 from only a year earlier. The Plus models did have a higher pixel density, and I would have liked to see that on the XR, but the smaller iPhone 8 never caused nearly the same outcry cry, even with basically the same screen. None of those phones did, but the XR comes along and suddenly it's the worst display imaginable. I made a video back before the XR even came out talking about this very subject, specifically pointing out the, well, quite frankly, stupidity of judging the phone for this one element before it had even released to reviewers. This video, I wish I worded it differently. In hindsight, it feels more like a hit piece on Unbox Therapy's horrible video on the subject, more than anything else, but more or less I do stand behind it, even if it got me by and far the most dislikes of my YouTube career. That comment section scarred me for life. I think mostly just the positive ones have risen to the top over the years, but back when all this went down, I had some pretty darn angry people. My main point, though, that I wanted to get across in that video, even if it wasn't as clear as it should have been, was this. If you know what a pixel density or a display resolution is, even if you don't fully understand what it means, if you have heard those terms, if you know, generally speaking, that higher numbers equals better, the iPhone XR wasn't a phone for you. It was a phone made for the everyday person, the average Joe who walks into their local Best Buy and just buys a smartphone that fits their budget, as well as the kind of person who maybe knows what a display resolution is, but doesn't care or has the wherewithal to understand that 326 pixels per inch is just as good as most iPhones have been in the past. The iPhone XR for so many people was just the natural upgrade in 2018. The resolution might have seemed low, but it didn't need to be higher, being perfectly acceptable and more than crisp enough for the average user, even using the iPhone XR or 11 today. While yes, I can say it doesn't look quite as clear as an OLED iPhone, at least if I pay attention, I never notice it unless I'm specifically thinking about it. I don't mean to get worked up about this all over again, and some of you might still really believe the XR was a complete ripoff, having a lower resolution than most other phones, at the price of $750. That was a pretty expensive phone in 2018. Might feel standard now, but don't forget the first $1,000 phone, or one of the first, had come out a year prior with the iPhone X, so $750 is still quite expensive. And if you disagree with me, that's totally cool. I'm just giving my own thoughts on the subject, and it's an important note when it comes to the life of the XR. It was a real controversy at the very beginning of its life before it even came out. It's funny because with the power of hindsight, we at least know how well the iPhone XR performed in sales, whether you think the screen was good enough or not. And I won't say I called it, but I totally called it. The XR has consistently been one of my top recommendations for those looking to get a new iPhone since its inception. It has sold so well. It's been a fantastic iPhone, and one that, quite frankly, I believe Apple could have kept selling for another year or two, at least had they wanted to. iOS updates go all the way back to the iPhone 6S and SE with the A9 chipset, and the XR has the A12. By basic math, that allows us to assume at least 3 more years of updates, so that's a complete guess. It could go longer, it could go shorter, but I'd say it's more likely to go longer if it has to be one of the two. But the truth is, Apple didn't want to keep the XR around for one sole reason: the 2020 iPhone SE, their cheapest iPhone and the last one to retain the classic home button design. This is the perfect phone for those unwilling or not quite ready to move on to the future most of us have already embraced, and those who would just rather stick with what they know: a fingerprint sensor and a home button. No crazy swiping up from the bottom to get where you need to go. Now yeah, the gesture system is very easy to adapt to, but for grandma or grandpa, it makes sense to keep things as simple as possible. And that doesn't just go for seniors. Some people like to just have a simple experience, and the iPhone SE caters perfectly to that group. And regardless of this, Apple wants to keep the SE around, but I think they could have done that while still selling the XR at a reduced price, and that's what I would have preferred. The late 2020 iPhone lineup was set as follows: the 12 Pro at $999, the 12 at $800, the 12 mini at $700, the iPhone 11 at $600, then the iPhone XR at $500, and the iPhone SE from early 2020 at $400. This is all in American pricings and based on buying these straight up unlocked from Apple. Fast forward to now, and we have the iPhone 13 Pro at $999, the 13 at $800, the 13 mini at $700, the iPhone 12 at $700 as well, the 12 mini at $600, the 11 at $500, and then the iPhone SE at $400. Regardless of the prices for the 12 and 13, what I would have really loved to see is the iPhone SE at $300, and then keep the iPhone XR available at $400. And I do think $400 as is a little bit much for the SE. It's a small phone and it's not great in the battery department. It has the same chipset as the iPhone 11, which is amazing, but the camera is an older sensor with software improvements, but it's still older. The SE is a great phone and it's certainly worth it for a subset of users, but I'm never going to recommend buying it over the iPhone 11, as that phone brings a way greater bang for your buck, especially at only $100 more. $500 for the 11, $400 for the SE, it's kind of a no-brainer. But if you had the SE at $300, that would have been very worth it, and then the XR at $400 would have been an absolute steal. The 11's always been $100 more than the XR, 10R. And actually, initially, it lowered the price that the 10R had set, costing only $700 when it was released, as opposed to the $750 the 10R had cost. It's a phone that's very much similar to the 10R in design particularly, with the major improvements coming in a significantly better camera that can take night mode photos, as well as an extra ultra-wide lens. Then there's the typical improvements you get in a year newer device, better chipset, slightly faster, you get the idea. But if these were things that you weren't too concerned about, the 11 didn't really offer much else besides different colors, making two phones that were very similar, both almost equally worth it. This actually shows a rare moment in modern Apple's history where they don't cut out a year-old smartphone that's very similar to the new one in order to avoid cannibalizing sales. That's why the 10, 10s, 11 Pro, and 12 Pro have all been discontinued only a year after launching. 10 was too similar to 10s and so on and so forth. You would get people en masse saving some money to get the year-old iPhone instead of paying more for the latest and greatest, and ultimately Apple definitely wants to make as much money as possible. But there was like almost a perfect gap in what you got for that extra $100 when it came to the iPhone 11 versus the 10R. That gap doesn't exist with the iPhone SE and iPhone 11. The 11 is just much better. But in summary, I think I've kept you here long enough. Why has Apple killed off the iPhone 10R? Because with the iPhone 11 at $500 and the SE at $400, there's no place for it. And while sure, I wish they had simply reduced prices across the board, I mean, I'm sure we all want that really, there's no question that the 10R still lived a very strong life, and the phone will without a doubt continue to perform terrifically for the millions and millions of users around the globe as Apple gives it update after update in the coming years. The iPhone 10R is still a great phone, just one that Apple won't sell you brand new. If you want to find one, carriers will still likely have it in stock for at least the next few months, or you'll need to turn to the used market, buying either pre-owned or refurbished. As I said in my iPhone buying guide I made recently, that's actually not a bad option, with the phone being a pretty decent deal over on eBay.com. So I'll link that video in the description if you're curious. But that's about all I got here. The iPhone 10R is dead, at least to Apple, but not to me, and probably not to you. Any of you still using the iPhone 10R? How's it working for you? Do you think Apple made the right choice cutting it from their lineup? Make sure you let me know in the comments down below. If you found this video interesting, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content not quite as clickbaity as this. You can follow me over on Twitter and Instagram at 91_tech if you'd like to for some reason, and we have a Discord link in the description. With that all being said, I'm Josh from 91tech, and I will see you all next time.